This presentation is entitled Using Data Effectively, How Understanding and Using Data Can Help You Make a Case. And notes are used from the textbook How to Design and Deliver Speeches by Leon Fletcher. In a debate, the main purpose of data is to prove a point. Did you ever get into an argument with someone and prove a point by going online? Did you ever argue about a presidential candidate one year, or maybe who won the Super Bowl one year? So you take out your phone, you go into Google, and you find your answer, and you prove it. It's right there. It's a great feeling. Data can help you prove a point. It can authenticate a point. It can give you a basis to compare things with. It can serve many, many purposes in a debate. I'm going to start with an example about Ricky Jackson and the Football Hall of Fame debate. Ricky Jackson was a football player in the National Football League in the 80s. When he retired, he had had a great career, and 5 years after his retirement, as with most pro football players, his name came up for eligibility to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Now, many years, a lot of players are nominated for only a few spots. In the first year he was nominated, he was not elected to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. The second time his name came up, it had become something of a controversy. A lot of people felt that he should be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and some others didn't. There was a great football writer named Peter King, and he happened to be on the Pro Football Hall of Fame selection committee. And knowing that Ricky Jackson was kind of a controversial subject, he decided to take his whole selection process public and let his writers know how he arrived at his decision. And the first thing he did is he established a baseline, and this baseline was Lawrence Taylor, who played outside linebacker for the New York Giants, and he is commonly regarded as the greatest outside linebacker to ever play the game. Peter King established a criteria. One was the number of years in the National Football League, since longevity counts for something, and two, the number of quarterback sacks. That's the statistic that outside linebackers are most often judged by. This was a relatively new statistic that the National Football League started keeping track of around the 70s, and so they had the numbers. And here's what Peter King came up with. Lawrence Taylor and Ricky Jackson were in the league for the exact same amount of time, 1981 to 1993, 12 years. Quarterback sacks, Lawrence Taylor had 152.5 sacks. Obviously, that 0.5 is because he and another player sacked a quarterback, so they both got credit. Ricky Jackson had 149 sacks. The numbers were so close that Peter King proved that Ricky Jackson belonged to the Hall of Fame, as did Lawrence Taylor, and that's what happened. Ricky Jackson was voted into the Hall of Fame. So that's one way to prove a point. But there are many, many things we call data when it comes time to prove a point. There are many types of data. It's not just numbers. It is many different things. These are all considered a type of data. Examples, stories, quotations, definitions, comparisons, contrasts, statistics. Let's go through them one by one. Examples. Leon Fletcher says that examples are among the most used and misused types of data. Why misused? Well, examples are incredibly effective in that it can clarify, add interest, or make a point memorable. But in the case of data, an example has to be valid proof. This is a bad example. And this comes from a debate we had in one of my classes years ago. The topic was the mandatory draft, should we have one? And the student on the side against the mandatory draft said, the Army is unfair in how it treats new soldiers. I know because of what happened to my brother in the Army. How is this a bad example? Well, an example, according to Merriam-Webster Dictionary, is a typical, representative, or illustrative instance or case. The textbook goes on to say, an example doesn't prove anything unless the example is shown to be representative of at least most, if not all, of those people or situations or experiences the example is drawn from. Stories are effective because they generally are human interest ones. That makes it effective because it is something the audience can relate to. So keep this phrase in mind. Data authenticates, stories humanize. Stories are effective because they reflect and emphasize the data you are using. They are also effective because they reinforce the fact that you are a source for your own material. Never underestimate that fact. Here's an example of a good story, and this is by former New Jersey Senator Bill Bradley. My father never went to college. At 16, he quit high school and went to work for the railroad to support his widowed mother and two sisters, and later got a job here at the local bank, shining pennies, as he called it. He worked his way up until eventually he was the majority shareholder. Now, that's the American dream. The story is short, to the point, and always focused on making its point. Remember the video, The Power of Telling Your Personal Story? It made a very interesting point. People almost always remember stories over statistics. So again, remember, data authenticates, but stories humanize. A story can be very effective because that's what people will remember. Quotations. In a debate, your challenge is to select the quotations that are most likely to influence your particular listeners. Here are the three factors you should use in picking quotations. 1. Your impression of the validity of the quotations. 2. The reputation, experience, knowledge, and authority of the individuals whom you quote. And 3. The impact the statements may have on your listeners. You need to ask yourself, is the speaker legitimate? Will it affect my particular audience? Always keep this in mind. The effectiveness of a quotation is in direct proportion to the reputation and knowledge of the person you are quoting. Definitions. According to the textbook, the major value of a definition in a speech is to establish with the audience a common basis for views. To prevent some in your audience from objecting to a viewpoint in a debate, it may be helpful to offer a definition. Definitions are valid uses of data because it allows you, the speaker, to define for your audience where exactly you are coming from. It's okay to say something like, I want to talk about hooping. I define hooping as playground basketball as opposed to team basketball at a school. Another example is from a former economist, Milton Friedman, a very famous free market economist, a strong believer in capitalism, who spoke constantly on the subject. So in one particular speech, he said, my subject is the future of capitalism. When I speak of the future of capitalism, I mean the future of competition, of free enterprise capitalism. He defined for the audience what he thought capitalism was. You can do the same in a debate. Comparisons are yet another way of providing common ground. However, in this case, comparisons allow us to build on ideas or themes. You generally use one side of a comparison that is well known to another side to build on an idea. Here's an example from the textbook. Just as Pearl Harbor was the dividing line for an isolationist nation, September 11th was the dividing line for a free and open society, one that may have valued convenience more than security. And this was by Jane Garvey, an administrator for the Federal Aviation Administration. This was shortly after 9/11, and what she was saying is that when Pearl Harbor happened in the 1940s, America changed its foreign policy from isolationism to getting involved in foreign wars. In the same way, September 11th changed our feelings about security and convenience, and we became more willing to sacrifice convenience to get more security. What is most important is that these things are relevant. The textbook has an example. You could claim that sailing a boat from California to Hawaii is like driving a car from California to New York because you'd go about the same distance. But is that valid? No. Sailing and driving are two completely different things. You need to make sure that, like quotations, like examples, like everything else, your comparisons are valid and effective. Contrasts are also an effective use of data. Again, the textbook has this example from late actor Christopher Reeve, a victim of spinal cord injury, in a speech before the 1996 Democratic National Convention. Right now, about 250,000 Americans have a spinal cord injury. Our government spends about $8.7 billion a year just maintaining these members of our family, but we spend only $40 million a year on research that would actually improve the quality of their lives, get them off public assistance, or even cure them. Why was that an effective contrast? Well, number one, it was factual. Christopher Reeve had done his homework and he had the numbers. At the same time, it was emotional. This is a very emotional subject of people whose lives have been greatly reduced from spinal injury. And at the same time, it was clear-headed from a making sense point of view. Christopher Reeve was saying right now America is being penny wise and pound foolish. They're spending billions of dollars on maintenance when they should be spending money on a cure. And that brings us to statistics. And the whole thing about statistics is make them interesting. Leon Fletcher says statistics can be boring to many people, but a good speaker can do much to make statistics interesting, comprehensible, and likely to be remembered. And that will be your challenge in the debate, to not just spout off statistics, but to make it interesting and comprehensible to whomever your audience might be. The following are ways to make statistics interesting. 1. Personalize, relate to your audience. This is an actual statistic. Each year, about 24% of Americans are victims of crimes. Okay, so let's take this percentage, we round it off to 25%, and now we have a number, 1 out of 4, and thus we have personalized the statistic. You can now say to your audience, this year, 1 out of every 4 of you will be victim of crime, according to national crime statistics. You can change percentages to numbers because that makes it much more real, but this takes some work, obviously. So let's round this off to 25%. What's the population of the United States right now? Well, as I do this recording, it's March 4th, 2021, and according to the U.S. Census Bureau, U.S. and World Population Clock, the United States population at this moment is 330,117,499. Okay. So now we take this and we turn this into 25%, and that's 82,529,374.75 people. And now we can say this year, according to crime statistics, it is estimated that 82,529,374.75 Americans are going to be victims of crime. But let's make it more accessible. Let's round it off. This year, over 82 million Americans are going to be victims of crime. And so what you're doing here is you're taking one percentage and you're saying, how can I make this more effective for my audience? And you play around with it. Another way to do this is to compare statistics with other statistics. When you have a number, think about how to make it more effective by comparing it with other numbers. For example, as of March 4th, 2021, the number of deaths in the U.S. due to the coronavirus is 518,000. Let's take another number, in this case from the Vietnam War, and here's a startling comparison. Nearly 10 times as many Americans have died in the last year from the coronavirus, 518,000, than Americans died in the Vietnam War, 58,220. The Vietnam conflict was 20 years, 1955 to 1975. And you can compare with easily visualized facts. When you develop your argument, keep in mind that your audience is people. If you can give them things that is easily visualized, it means something to you, it will make it so much more effective. So in staying with the coronavirus for the moment, I can give you all a statistic that might startle you and at the same time really make you think. According to worldometer.info, a nonprofit international statistic-keeping organization, over 29 billion Americans have contacted the coronavirus in the last year as of 2:50 p.m. March 4th, 2021. That is more people than all of the citizens of the United States' 10 most populated cities, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Houston, Phoenix, Philadelphia, San Antonio, San Diego, Dallas, and San Jose combined. The point is this. Don't bury your audience with statistics. Don't try to impress your audience with your knowledge. Use data that will help you make the point you're trying to make. So in conclusion, data is more than just numbers. These are all considered data. Examples, stories, quotations, definitions, comparisons, contrasts, and statistics. Don't be afraid to use as many of these as you need to make effective points during